morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. I'm Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Monday, April 4th, 2022. And today I'm revisiting something that I covered just recently, 2 new unconstitutional ATF regulations, and I know that's redundant. 2 unconstitutional ATF regulations on the way this summer. But instead of just only bad news, I've got a silver lining of some good news. On this episode, I'm going to tell you about a Montana law that was signed and went into effect last year that at the time did nothing to address any federal gun control that was on the books at the time. But it was crafted in such a smart way as to make sure that it would automatically deal with things in the future. And that's exactly what's happening. It's going to automatically, as soon as those new regulations go into effect by the ATF, Montana will be banned from using state or local law enforcement personnel, resources, etc. on these 2 or probably anything else going forward. And that's an essential step to bring them to an end. First, before getting to that, I want to say a quick hello to everyone out in the live chat. While we allow people another minute or so to join us for the live stream, I appreciate you being here, whether this is your first episode or you've been here for every single one since day one. There's Dixie Strong in Bama, Cheriton Farmer in Missouri, Richard Banks in Fredonia, Kansas, Joe Vasquez, Liam McCollum, awesome, from Montana. Good to see you, buddy. Erwin Havernick, Dave Simmons, Alan Mosley. This is great. The ATF is just like a migraine. It shouldn't exist. Exactly. That's the only thing they're authorized to do under the Constitution is disband themselves. But that's another episode. Alan Hughes, Lisa, God's Green, Hunters 770. Good afternoon on Twitch. We don't get a lot of people following us on Twitch. I appreciate you being there. Hope you enjoy the episode. But let's get right to this. And I want to set the foundation for kind of just an understanding of what we're talking about, the strategy that we're talking about. And for that, we're going to look back to James Madison, his 4-step plan to stop federal programs without relying on the federal government to magically limit its own power, which never, of course, happens. He advised us how to deal with federal programs, whether we thought they were unconstitutional or just bad policy, in Federalist 46. And one of those 4 things that I think is very important is what he said. Again, my words, not his. A refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union and using legislative devices, which would be added, often be added on such occasions. Not once in a while, but often added when you don't like the policy on a state or a local level, or you think it's unconstitutional on a state or a local level. Then you use legislative devices and a refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union. If you want to read about the other 3 steps in his 4-step plan in Federalist 46, I've got a link for that that will be in the show notes to this article. James Madison, 4 steps to stop federal programs. Short version, he said if a number of states using this approach that he advised in Fed 46, he said it would create a situation the federal government would hardly be willing to encounter. And that was at a time when the government was going to be very, very small and wasn't planning on having to rely on the states to implement or effectuate their acts and regulatory programs. But these days, basically everything the federal government does, they may not tell you this, they want you to think they're big, bad, and powerful, and they are dangerous, of course, but they rely on local enforcement for basically everything. And let's apply this to the ATF, which, is my buddy Alan said, shouldn't exist. Congrats again on your 200th episode for It's Too Late. Pretty awesome. I was happy to be a part of that as well. You guys should check out Alan's show as well. Anyway, so let's apply that to the ATF. The most recent numbers that we have from their annual report shows that they have 5,082 full-time employees. About a third of these are in administration. Mind you, I went to government-run school, so my math might suck. Maybe it's a quarter. I don't know. It's a pretty significant amount. So 5,100 full-time employees, about 1,700 in admin positions. They've got investigators and special agents. It's about 3,300. Not a lot of people, but that's basically what they have to cover the entire country. And they have agreements on almost every law enforcement agency in the country to do partnerships, to work on enforcement, to participate in civil asset forfeiture and the federal equitable sharing program, and joint task forces to enforce federal gun control, federal drug laws, and the like, because they tie in quite a bit. And, anyone who's run a business that relies on manpower, person power, woman power, whatever the hell you want to call it, doesn't matter, recognizes that the amount of people that you can hire to do the work and how efficient they are has a great impact on how much you can get done. And for the ATF, that means enforcement. And I've got another article up here that I will link to in the show notes that includes kind of an overarching from 2014 to 2020, their capabilities. And we can see that their convictions range. They try to prosecute many more, but the final conviction that they get is somewhere between 4,000 and 7,000. If you're wondering, most of the worst numbers in history were from the period 2017 through 2020. So that might tell you who's responsible for the most federal gun control ever, but we'll see what the most recent numbers look like soon-ish. They're pretty slow on these numbers. But the short version is, even though I would say 4,000 to 6,000 convictions are 4,000 to 6,000 too many, because the number that they should have really should be zero. The fact of the matter is if there are 13 million short-barreled shotguns or 80% lowers or pistol braces that the ATF or bump stocks that the ATF says you can't have, 13, 14, 10 million, there's zero chance the feds have the enforcement capability to get anything done about it, especially on their own. And this, mind you, when it comes to federal gun control, is almost entirely with partnership on a state or local level. Now, I covered this in some detail in another episode, 4 essential steps to nullify federal gun control earlier this year. We can use the same strategy that Madison advised in Federalist 46, specifically tailored to federal gun control, and start out with a ban using legislative devices and a refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union, as the so-called father of the Constitution told us to do, and we can ban enforcement of federal gun control. And this, with that as a foundation, for those of you who have been here all along, who read our work all the time or have read our State of the Nullification Movement report, listen to me talk about this repeatedly, you know that this is the strategy. But hopefully we're reaching and teaching new people all the time. So that brings me to Joe's new gun control and Montana. But first, I should mention that if you want to find the stuff that I'm talking about, I'm mentioning other articles, the ATF statistics, another episode. I've got some reporting on Montana coming up in a bit. If you want to find the links that I'm mentioning, you got to follow us over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And on each individual episode, I publish a blog post about 1 to 2 hours after the live show is done streaming, and there you're going to find all the different platforms we're on. Of course, we live stream on all the mainstream ones, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, but we also live stream at the decentralized, censorship-resistant Odyssey.com, Odyssee. We upload videos everywhere possible, Rumble, MeWe, BitChute, Brighteon, BitTube. We're on the mainstream ones, also at Instagram, LinkedIn, all over the place. We have the audio-only podcast edition. And you can even find our membership program where you can put your financial faith behind our work for as little as $2 a month. Again, the show homepage, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. You can see that up on the screen here. As you scroll down, there's different categories of topics that we cover, various things from 10th Amendment to anti-federalists and the like. Anyways, let's get over to Joe's new gun control and what to do about it. So there's 2 new regulations coming this summer. The first would require, and this is from an article by Mike Maharrey back in February, the first would require registration of 80% lowers. These are basically unfinished firearm parts, Mike writes, that you can use to build your own gun. Because they fall outside of the FFL process, and I'm not going to get into any details on this right now, they effectively allow the private manufacture of unregistered, unmarked firearms, rifles, etc. I think we should just say, Mike says rifles, but I think we should have firearms in general. Some people refer to them as ghost guns. Ghosts are scary, and guns that the government can't track, of course, are scary to the power of government. This new ATF regulation, Mike writes, is expected to be finalized in June. And then there's a second, which is set to go in effect in August. I guess that's still summer. Again, I went to government school. I don't know some of the basics. Will place regulations on pistol braces. This device, Mike writes, serves as a stabilizer that enables a shooter to fire with one hand. They're popular with disabled people. And of course, they want to make this much more difficult for everybody to be able to have. They're very popular with people who are disabled or can't use both arms, whatever the term we want to use. But the feds claim that they're a dangerous firearm accessory and need to be controlled under the 1934 National Firearms Act, which shouldn't exist in the first place. I covered both of these regulations in some detail in an episode just this last month, Joe's new federal gun control and how to stop it. That will, of course, be linked to in the show notes, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. Now, let's go to this report that we filed on Montana's House Bill 258, which was signed by the governor and went into immediate effect on April 23rd last year, 2021. It was sponsored by Representative Jedediah Hinkle, and the new law, Meharry writes, prohibits police officers, state employees, and employees of any political subdivision of the state from enforcing, assisting in the enforcement of, or otherwise cooperating in the enforcement, basically anything, any way that they can help out or participate, providing logistics, and we're going to get into some of the details on that. Anything for certain federal gun control measures, they are not allowed to do on any new what's called a federal ban on firearms, magazines, or ammunition. Now, they broadly define federal ban. So you can use any term that you want. Now, federal ban, if you just left it as a federal ban, they would say, well, means this, or the courts are going to twist it to mean very specific things that don't, or they're very narrow, not as broad as what we want it to be. And they define this in the act. So you have to reference how they defined what a federal ban is. And this is a federal law, executive order, rule, or regulation that is enacted, adopted, or becomes effective on or after January 1st, 2021, last year, or a new and more restrictive interpretation of an existing law that existed on January 1st, 2021. And that's very important that they included that in there, because if you just say a new regulation, we're only going to draw a line in the sand, and we're going to say if you do anything new, and I'm going to get to why they did that in Montana in just a little bit, because they actually wanted to actually address all federal gun control in the original bill that was filed by Hinkle, past, present, and future, but it was opposed. I'll get to that in a moment. If you want to address new federal gun control, a lot of people say, well, anything that I've seen legislation where they say anything new, and we've supported that, but I didn't even think about it until I saw Gary Marbett in Montana actually push for this type of language in legislation, because most of the new federal gun control, whether it's a bump stock or a pistol brace or an 80% lower, what they're doing is they're taking the 1934 NFA or the Gun Control Act of 68 or something else, and they're saying, well, this definition, which has existed for decades, now means this. So if you don't actually if you only ban the enforcement of a new federal gun control, but they're saying, well, this is an old one, so this isn't new, so that doesn't apply. That's how it'll play out in practice, because a lot of the law enforcement agencies, they love the federal loot that comes with helping the feds violate your rights. So anyways, it also addresses a new or more restrictive interpretation of an existing law that already existed on January 1st, 2021, that infringes upon, calls into question, prohibits, restricts, or requires individual licensure for or registration of the purchase, ownership, possession, transfer, or use of any firearm, any magazine, other ammunition feeding device, or other firearm accessory. Basically anything. It also prohibits them in Montana from participating in federal enforcement actions, and prohibits the expenditure or allocation of public funds or resources for such enforcement. It's a pretty broad bill, but when it was passed, it actually impacted nothing. So nothing changed in 2021, and a lot of people just ignored it. I thought it was actually a very good bill based on the scenario. Anyways, here's how TJ Martinell put it in an article we published just this morning. He said this bill was a top priority for the Montana Shooting Sports Association, the best state-level gun rights organization ever. These guys really were the beginning of the 10th Amendment movement, to use the 10th Amendment to protect the Second Amendment. Anyways, that was a top priority for them. I think it was their number 2 bill this last year. President Gary Marbett told TAC that, as it is, federal gun control enforcement is already unpopular among the state's local police agencies. We hear this from time to time. And even though the agencies generally go along with this stuff, a lot of the on-the-ground guys, when we hear from them, they're like, man, I can't stand the ATF. If I didn't have to do it, but they still continue doing it because they're told to, or they're going to lose their job. It's a very, very sad situation. However, they frequently assist their federal partners, and I like that Gary mentioned this, and maybe this is a direct quote, but this is how TJ, after he talked to him, this is the report that he put together. They frequently assist their federal partners, and we hear this in every single state when we try to ban them from enforcing anything on the federal level. The localities, they're like, but we don't want to damage our relationship with our federal partners. They say this all the time. They frequently assist their federal partners, such as the DEA. The drug war is a gun control program. They use gun control to maximize sentences in the drug war. And if you oppose one, you got to oppose both. It's unfortunate that generally it's one or the other from most people in the political realm. But anyways, they participate with the DEA. In some instances, Gary says, could one day include the confiscation of unregistered 80% lowers or pistol braces, as well as any new federal gun regulations they're not authorized to enforce. So they're banned from doing this. It addresses not just brand new gun control measures, but of course the new or more restrictive versions of old ones. So these new regulations on pistol braces and lowers would fall under the state law that was passed last year. Under the law, Marbut said police assisting the feds can still participate in a raid conducted for other reasons, while insisting all matters regarding gun regulation violations that fall under the state law are handled only by federal agents. He added that directly enforcing the two new ATF rules will be difficult for the feds because of how much they rely on non-federal resources. The feds rely on non-federal resources all the time, and we can see, again, from those statistics, they have the capacity to close between 4,000 and 6,000 cases per year with their 5,100 total employees. They try to expand it all the time. I think it got it to 5,500 and then back to 51, but it doesn't change a huge amount. It would take a massive amount, and I think there's more than 7,000 people willing to have a pistol brace in Montana. I've read some reports that says there's anywhere between 10 and 40 million of these. And mind you, these enforcement statistics, these are almost entirely with state and local enforcement assistance. But here's the dirty little secret that supporters of the monster state, that the gun grabbers, that the ATF, that the DEA, and all these federal agencies that shouldn't exist in the first place, they don't want you to know, is that partnerships don't work too well when half the team quits. Here's how TJ describes the raids, or how they play out from his discussion with Gary Marbut. He said the standard practice for federal raids is to coordinate in advance with local police to perform a variety of duties, such as creating a perimeter around the scene, stringing tape, and monitoring. If you've ever seen images or memes online of like a no-knock raid, which shouldn't exist either, but generally you'll see kind of this V pattern of law enforcement agencies or SWAT agents in kind of a SWAT team setup, and you've got like 7 or 8 on one side, 7 or 8 on the other side, and back there, 10, 20 feet, which you generally don't see in the picture, is the ATF agent. There's the one federal agent, maybe 2, coordinating things, and most of the grunt work is actually done by local law enforcement, sheriffs, police, etc. Going back to TJ, also if someone is arrested, they are typically housed in a local police jail, a detail that is predetermined to the raid. If the planned raid is conducted specifically for violating the new ATF rules, Montana state and local police can't assist at all. Period. They're out. If the raid occurs anyway and the person is arrested on charges of violating those rules, the feds must find their own place to house suspects. In other words, they can't even use local jails. There aren't too many ATF jails, and I know someone's going to say, well, then that's just going to encourage them to do this. And of course, over time, I think they're probably going to start doing this. But why do we have to help them violate their rights just because they're going to try to find another way to do it later? We want to make it as difficult as possible. And the more that we can shine a light on this, the more people will be aware. And we go from there. As John Dickinson, the penman of the Revolution, put it, he said, small things grow great by concord. You literally start, you plant the flag, you push things forward. Duty is ours. We'll see what happens going forward. Marbut said the feds will figure that out pretty quickly. To do a law enforcement action that doesn't involve locals, they're going to have to put together a whole different plan of action with anybody they take into custody. They don't like that. It's grunt work. They're not used to it. It's going to be a bother. This is a big reason why the President Joe's DOJ is suing Missouri over the Second Amendment Preservation Act that also went into effect last year. It was much broader than the Montana bill, but it has already resulted in just a short amount of time of many state and local law enforcement agencies withdrawing agents from joint task forces with the ATF. And their complaint in the lawsuit is talking about how banning the use of local law enforcement is making it more difficult for the feds to be able to do enforcement, and that barely is getting going. So this is very, very important stuff that's happening in Montana. Now, I should also point out, as I mentioned before, that Gary and his team, Representative Hinkle, they did not take this approach to start, just addressing new federal gun control. They tried. The original bill, when it was filed, would have had the same approach, but most federal gun control ever past, present, and future. But as happens in every state where we try to get this type of legislation moving forward, where activists try to get this legislation moved forward, law enforcement lobby groups aggressively went against the bill. They sent letters. They show up in hearings. They say this is going to be dangerous. It's going to protect criminals, because the only way you can stop criminals is by helping an unconstitutional federal agency violate the Constitution constantly with everything they do. Merely just punching in at work for an ATF agent is a violation of the Constitution, because the agency shouldn't exist in the first place. But law enforcement lobbies against this in Montana. They actually had the bill killed in committee. It was tabled. So in other words, it was a huge vote. It was maybe like 18-4, something easy peasy. This thing was definitely not going to pass. So rather than just letting it die, they decided to do a different strategy. Marbut was really smart about this. He's like, I don't think they're going to pose, and I think he probably was having some conversations. They're not going to pose anything if it changes nothing today. So they backed off their opposition because he changed it to, will anything on or after January 1st, 2021, knowing smartly that every new administration brings us some new attempt at federal gun control. It doesn't change. So this was really smart strategy. He recognized the bill was going to get killed. They recognized that they had to get something done that would be effective, that wouldn't just be grandstanding and talk. And now the law that they got passed is now going to have an impact on the federal gun control measures that are coming this summer and anything else coming down the line. So I covered this in some detail in an episode last year as well, Fortitude and Perseverance, a lesson on liberty from Montana. It's talking about having smart strategy, knowing when to push forward, when to take a step back, when to take one step forward, things like that. Thomas Jefferson, in his November 17th, 1798 letter to James Madison, announcing his joy, I guess we can put it, at the passage of the Kentucky resolutions, where he called for nullification of the Alien and Sedition Acts of that year. He said, I think we should affirm all the important principles these resolutions contain, but we don't want to push things to extremities. We have to be in a position where we can push things as far as events will render prudent. Push as far as events will render prudent. That's Thomas Jefferson's strategy for nullification. And if Jefferson says that that's the right approach, then I think Montana nailed this one. Now, even more importantly than banning state and local law enforcement from enforcing federal gun control is the fact that if everyone complies with the federal gun laws, if everyone complies with the licensure requirements or the restrictions or the new taxes, or turns their firearms or accessories in, then there's no enforcement that needs to happen. So as long as everyone continues being compliant, complacent, and proudly being law-abiding citizens, which is huge in the gun rights community for some reason, talking about that all the time, if that's going to continue to be the case, then it doesn't matter if states are banned from enforcing. It doesn't even matter if the feds are banned from enforcing. If there's going to be no enforcement by anybody and people comply, then there is no enforcement. So it really requires people to be willing to stick their neck out, and I don't know the right situation for the right person, but people have to be willing to take a stand for liberty and exercise rights, whether the government gives them permission to or not. And I covered this in some more detail in another episode, Compliance is Violence. John Dickinson, that penman of the Revolution, one of the leading founding fathers, and Lysander Spooner, the 19th century great thought leader and anarchist, on the path to liberty. They both advise a very similar strategy, even though they had a very different end goal. And we're working really, really hard every single day to get this kind of information out there to more people so we can nullify more federal gun control. We can nullify all unconstitutional acts, and really, it's most of them. If you're talking 90%, you're probably on a low level. And you can help us today by joining as a member for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. We also have annual, lifetime, 5-year membership programs. Please don't feel obligated to join us, but if you do have a little extra loot sitting around, a little extra fiat that's losing value, we will take it and use it against the empire as good as we can. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. You can also help us spread the word by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, smashing the like button on any of the video platforms, leaving comments, subscribing, getting notifications. All of these things will help trigger algorithms and tell those platforms to show us to more people. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you next time here on the path to liberty.